Welcome everyone to the People Solve Problems podcast. My name is Jamie Flinchball, and today we have a special guest, Steve Brown, with us. Steve, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So a little introduction. Steve's one of the world's top AI futurists, in-demand consultant for Fortune 100 companies and maximizing AI's potential in their businesses. The author of the AI Ultimatum, and a long experience. There you go, for those watching, a copy of the book, and a long history and career with Intel and Google DeepMind, which is quite the pedigree. So really interested in having a conversation, and I want to start with the idea of futurist work
Yeah.
before we kind of get to AI. Right now, I kind of like to tell people that, the waters are muddy. And there's an old phrase that says the best fishing is in muddy waters. And so, taking that phrase and applying it to the work of being a futurist and working with teams in
Mhm.
futurist work, is that work more about clearing up the waters, or is it more about learning how to fish in muddy waters?
I'm still trying to clear the waters for people, but you're right, it is getting muddier. I'm trained as a futurist. I was a futurist both at Intel, I worked in Intel Labs, and more recently at Google DeepMind as their in-house futurist. And it's some people think it's a prediction game. You know, you're trying to predict the future, and that's not what a futurist does. That's a fortune teller.
Yes.
And some people are like, how do you come up with your ideas? And it's not like I go into a darkened room and smoke peyote and come up with big thoughts, right? It is a discipline, and it's what you're doing is looking at the trends, playing them forward, looking at how those trends will play out over time and intersect at a time in the future. And so my brain is trained to think 5 and 10 and 15 years out. I've been doing that for a decade and a half now. Um, and it's getting increasingly difficult. It's hard to figure out with any kind of precision what the world will be like 5 years from now. I
Hmm.
have some good ideas about it, and it's partly because we have such an unstable global political system at the moment, but mostly it's the speed of technological development, and specifically AI. Um, the changes we've seen just in the last 3 months. Suddenly, AI is way more capable. You look
Hmm.
back a year, and the difference in just a year is phenomenal, and the difference over 2 years is night and day. So, trying to project where AI will be 6 months from now, and 12 months from now, and 5 years from now, it gets quite challenging. And the other reason is even if you can make projections about where AI will be in terms of its capability, the ripple effects of powerful, maybe super intelligence available on demand at very low cost are huge. They change everything about everything. And so you have, this not a chaotic system, but such a complex system, it's hard to model out all the moving pieces.
Yeah.
So that's why the waters are muddy. I try and help people think through, okay, let's game it out. What are at least the big things that we can project are most likely 3 and 5 years from now?
Yeah, fantastic. And just continuing on the work of futurists with companies, with teams,
Mhm.
sort of the bridge from the imagination space, the exploration space to the implementation space. Where does the rubber meet the road? Sort of where do you turn that into action?
So I deliver AI innovation workshops. So I help my clients understand what are the different flavors of AI, what kind of business problems can you solve with them, how do you bolt these pieces together to create solutions, and we brainstorm use cases for their business. And one of the things I talk about, my company's name, it only shows up on my invoices. I don't use it for my branding or anything, but it's Possibility and Purpose. And I named it that because I've always seen technologies as an incredible enabler. And what you're looking at is what's the landscape of possibility? And then your job as a leader now is to figure out what you're not going to do. Because there's so much possibility, particularly if you're using AI. So how do you figure out what you're not going to do and what you are going to do? You look at the intersection between your corporate purpose and this landscape of possibility, and that helps you figure out what you're going to focus on. And
Yeah.
that's the exercise I lead them through.
Excellent. I like the how that flows and how that sequences, and I like the name of the company as well. That's really interesting. Um, so switching more into the AI space and some of the
Mhm.
things you explore there. One thing you've sort of written about, talked about a bit, and I kind of want to hear your latest thinking on it because I'm sure maybe it evolves.
Yeah.
Is technology has a hard time automating empathy and perhaps some of the other human elements that makes us human.
Mhm.
Um, I think most people would focus on the negative consequences of that, but what might be some of the positive opportunities with that premise?
That's a big question. Blimey, Jamie. Yeah, I don't tend to think about artificial intelligence as much as it's simulated intelligence at this point. And so AI can simulate emotions, but it doesn't have emotions.
Hmm.
And it can simulate empathy, and it actually can do quite a good job of that. There are some places where that's inappropriate, and we can talk about that in a moment. But I think there is some benefit that there's some early signs that AI therapists, so helping people with their mental health, there's a group of people who will never go and talk to their problems with another human being. That's just a
Right.
horrible idea to them. But maybe they can get some support from an AI that can help give them some tools or some frameworks, different ways to think about it. So AIs that have been tuned as therapists and therefore have some sort of simulated empathy to understand what the human is going through can be a support for that group of people. And sometimes it can convince them that, hey, you really should talk to a professional. And so they're programmed that if the person is exhibiting suicidal thoughts or, just sounding like they maybe need a bit more professional help, they're going to push them towards and encourage them to go and speak to another human being. So I think that there's some opportunity there. I think there is great risk in things like character AI, with their, synthetic girlfriend or boyfriend experience.
Hmm.
Scott Galloway talks about this quite a lot. We learn in our teenage and early 20s, we have to fail on the battlefield quite a few times in
Yeah.
order to develop skills, right? And if there's no friction in the process of learning how to form relationships with other people, whether they are romantic relationships or friendships or work relationships, we don't learn those skills.
Hmm.
And some of these AIs just make it so easy that I'm worried, as Scott Galloway is, that people aren't going to develop those skills, and that's going to do them a disservice for the future.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely a big risk, maybe for society as a whole, certainly for individuals
Yeah.
participating. But I think that word simulated is an important distinction that's worth people reflecting on. Um, but as you indicated, there's some very positive opportunities that might not have existed without it. So.
Yeah, AI is a scaler. It lets us scale human effort, and you'll be able to have a personal tutor for every person on earth that will complement a human teacher. And
Mhm.
that shouldn't be a threat to human teachers because they don't have the time to lavish on every single student and to adapt their teaching style based on that student's learning pace and the modality of learning that they are naturally predisposed to. And an AI can do that. So we should think about these things as complementary.
Yeah. Um, Another thing you talk about in sort of the implementation, especially if we bring it inside companies, but I imagine this applies outside of work as well, that
Mm,
AI is really best thought of as a teammate, something to
right.
collaborate with. But at the same time, humans aren't always naturally great at collaboration. They struggle for all sorts of reasons. Some of them human, some of them sort of the process of collaboration. Um, how does AI work as a collaborator? How do we have to change as humans to embrace that?
Yeah.
And how do we overcome some of the challenges we might have in everyday collaboration to make better use of that?
Yeah, AI has a set of capabilities that are going to change our relationship with machines and technology this year and into 2027. Um, AI in the past has been this chatbot experience, a turn-by-turn experience. Agentic AI wraps a chatbot in a set of other capabilities, a perception module that understands what you're working on right now, a memory so that it can understand your quirks and preferences and also learn from its own mistakes so it gets better over time. A planning module and reasoning module so it can take quite a complex task from you and break it down and then execute on that task. And then an action module so it actually can perform work using access to tools or connecting into corporate systems like your CRM or your ERP system or whatever. And so AI is growing up this year and it's going to feel a lot more like a digital coworker, a
Mhm.
digital employee. And so workforce planning changes in organizations because you now have to think about how do I partner machine intelligence with the human intelligence I have, and in what ways can I partner those two together? And that I've identified three main ways you can do that. The first one is you build agents that are offload agents. They're designed to do the work that we don't really enjoy doing. The boring, repetitive stuff, booking a meeting room and finding the right time on the calendar when you can get five people together. Not fun, right? But that's something an agent would be really good at. Booking a flight, finding you some research online, right? These are things that is an offload task. And there'll be a lot of those offload agents. The other two types of agents I think are way more interesting because they're less about, I guess, cost reduction and more about value creation. And so the second type of agent is about elevation. How do you elevate the person that's using it? And that's where the agent is now partnering with a human being. And then the third type of agent is an extend agent. This is a more unique type of agent, but it's one that partners with a human to extend their abilities. So you can
Mhm.
start to do things you could never do before. And that essentially turns us all into superheroes by partnering us with an AI. And I think that's the opportunity. Those are the ingredients that business leaders now have to play with and reimagine their workflows and figure out I now have a blend of not only three different types of agents, but actually three different types of talent. I've got humans, and they'll still be humans. I've got digital agents, and I've got robots. If you have a physical aspect to your job, robots are going to be on the work scene within 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
And so now you have these three ingredients to play with as part of your workforce planning. And that's a huge change for every organization to comprehend and then roll out.
Yeah. I think related to that, getting to workforce planning, we're actually seeing an increase in more strategic CHROs at companies
Yeah.
as opposed to more tactical procedural policy CHROs, perhaps because of these challenges. And if I can ask you sort of like one of the big concerns people will ask about is, jobs and what's this going to do to jobs? There's certainly been many sort of press releases about companies reducing headcount um, and either hinting at or suggesting directly this is because of AI. Although I certainly would believe that only some of that is maybe AI, and most of it is they just hired too much over the last few years and are using that as a bit of cover. But where are you seeing things, I'll say more 2026,
Mhm.
in terms of the impact on jobs, job growth, job reduction, and then maybe what does the long term look like?
I mean, let's go back to those agents. If you are offloading tasks, you're freeing up time. If you're elevating someone's performance, you're perhaps boosting their not just their productivity and efficiency, but their creativity, their intuition, their decision-making abilities. But maybe now, if you have these boosted, elevated employees that have offload support for the tasks they don't want to do, which just takes the suck out of their jobs and makes them, happier at work, you maybe only need 7 people to do the work that was originally required 10. So there's certainly, if you look at it as a zero-sum game, yeah, it could lead to job losses. But to me, that is 20th century thinking. That is because that's what IT has done for us for the last 50 years, is help to boost productivity and efficiency. It's about cost cutting. And leaders have got this in their head that that is their fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, is to cut where they can and to be
Mhm.
more efficient, more effective. Okay, yeah, you can do that with AI, but you can also do much more. There is a value creation component, which maybe isn't the comfort zone of today's leaders, and it should be.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example from Jensen Huang, the CEO of the most the highest value company on the planet right now, NVIDIA. He was asked in late 2024 what his plans are for the future of his workforce. And his answer was, we've got about 30,000 employees today, and over time I plan to grow that to about 50,000, supported by 100 million AI assistants across every group. That is workforce planning for the future.
Mhm.
It's to think about, how do I extend my impact? How do I go beat my competition? How do I change the game on my competition by perhaps developing new business models, doing things I couldn't do before, because I'm amplifying my people with agents, and perhaps I'm doing it at a 10-to-1 or 100-1 ratio. And people are already seeing this in software, rather than, when they're using AI agents to help them code, they're getting, double the productivity. They're going to head towards 10x the productivity. Do you think they will have 1/10 of the programmers, or they'll develop 10x the amount of code? The
Mhm.
answer is the latter. And that's the opportunity that all businesses have, is to use AI to amplify themselves, not to stay where they are and cut human capital. That just makes no sense. As I say, it is the old way of thinking about things, and leaders can do better than that. It
Yeah.
takes imagination and planning.
Excellent. I like, kind of incorporating those skills into the future is, yeah, certainly there's an inflection point, but it requires thinking differently about how we go forward as a company, both internally and external strategy, value creation, as you indicate.
And that's the central thesis of my book. And it's full of frameworks and approaches to help leaders do exactly that.
So, thinking in terms of, frameworks and then turning that into, what's my strategy for AI? If I'm not a technology company, which most companies aren't, but many of them want to think like one. Um, there's very few examples of someone truly transforming what they do with AI, and there's also been a lot of both press and research around sort of big project failure rates in AI. Um, but then we also see many, many small improvements, very, very niche, very process oriented, very specific types of improvements.
Mhm.
So how does somebody think about that spectrum from
Yeah.
individual usage to small improvements to transformational DNA changing of the company?
So you got to start somewhere. And so I always advise my clients, start small, but start somewhere. Find a small bounded project where you can, either bring in an external partner to help you build out what you need, or you can use some off-the-shelf AI capabilities and tune them for your own internal use, and use it to solve a problem and build on that momentum. And so I coach them on the IDC Three Horizons framework. So figure out, what are some short-term wins we can get that give us some incremental improvements. What are some medium-term projects we can seed now? As we learn from these short-term projects, what are some medium-term things we can do where we can be a bit more disruptive? And then seed one or two long-term projects, which is going to pay off in 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years, where we're looking to change the game. We're looking to figure out a new way to deliver a business model, and to deliver value to the marketplace, because we've made this significant investments into AI. And if you span, AI strategies are all about finding balance, right? You want some short term, some medium term, a few long term. It's probably a 60-30-10 kind of mix across those. You also want to balance across using AI to improve customer experience, employee experience and operational excellence. So you want to balance across those. And when you're using agents, you want to balance across elevate, extend, and offload. So
Mhm.
it's finding those balances. And to respond to the sort of very early part of your question, um, there have been a lot of failures of AI projects. And I think there are three reasons for that. First one is the technology wasn't quite ready for prime time, particularly on the agentic side and
Mhm.
generative AI. We weren't able to ground the models, and so there was too much hallucination, too much inaccuracy. Second one was um, poor change management, just not engaging employees in the work. I had one client who built a bunch of agents. They were kind of ahead of their time and just went out and tried to deploy them. And the employees had never heard about what was coming their way, had never been consulted. And guess what? There was a lot of middle fingers waved around and people threatened to quit. I'm
Mhm.
never working with an AI. So just horrible change management. And then the third reason they fail is because people don't get their data house in order. AI, the rocket fuel for AI is data.
Mhm.
And if your data is fragmented, dirty, not well organized, it's kind of bad data in, bad AI out. So those are the three big reasons I've seen that people have failed spectacularly. And that's led to sort of 80-90% failure rate. But I think that will turn around as the technology matures. People learn this is a major change management effort, and it's all about the data, baby.
Yeah. Great summary of those fundamental pillars of building out that strategy. I don't have a lot of time left, but I want to, you work with these companies
Yeah.
that are working on strategies and their plans and of course their implementation. A question I get, especially from CFOs, is how do I calculate my return on investment in my AI portfolio, whatever that might be? Part of my argument will be, well, how do you value learning for future implementation, which is a tricky question or a tricky thing to calculate. But how do you answer that question? I'm sure you've gotten as well. How do
Yeah.
you calculate the return on investment at a company level?
It really depends on the use cases you're looking at. An obvious place that people have been deploying AI so far is to create internal knowledge systems. So essentially a chatbot that makes it easier for employees to find the information that they need. There was a study done that the average knowledge worker spends 32 days a year, so 32 days out of 365, just looking for the information they need to do their jobs. So if you can use AI with a knowledge base, so you're using a vector database, connecting it to your proprietary internal data, and just making it easier for employees to surface the data, the information they need to do their jobs, if you could cut that in half to just 16 days a year spent looking for information, think about that return on investment. So you have to think through what's the business impact I'm having? You can look at efficiency scores, of course, and you can measure, the amount of money you've had to spend for the amount of, extra efficiency and productivity you're getting. But you need to look below the hood a little bit. What's going on in the organization? What are some human challenges we can solve, whether that's for our employees or for our customers, that are going to accrue value to the brand, that are going to make us more efficient, that are going to improve my job satisfaction scores, improve my retention. There was an example in HBR about 2 years ago of a major enterprise software company. They deployed AI in their customer support areas, mostly to address an attrition problem. They had huge turnover.
Mhm.
So it really depends on the problem that you're addressing and why you're implementing AI. It may be more complicated to measure ROI than just a simple, finance calculation.
Excellent. So last question, sort of at a company strategy standpoint. Who owns AI is a question that a lot of companies seem to struggle with. First, should it be centralized or distributed? And a lot of companies kind of start off at least putting it under IT. But I certainly see more companies changing that as they realize it may not be the best home. How do you either advise or at least have a framework for helping people think about who owns it and how do you kind of get your arms around it and organize?
Great question, easy answer. Everybody owns it. Everybody owns the transition. Line of business owns it, HR owns it, IT owns it. It is a team effort. Our IT is not going to magically deliver an AI strategy for the business.
Hmm.
It just won't. AI, sorry, IT has been optimized to deliver a tool set to the organization and keep them maintained and improve uptime. They're not there to re-engineer the business, which is what you need to do. So that line of business has to lead this. What I recommend to most of my clients is get a chief AI officer. They're probably going to have some technical knowledge, but it's not about the technical capabilities they bring. They are a change agent. They're going to drive change. They need to be empowered. They're probably at the C-suite level, and they are about change management more than anything else. Um, One of the observations I make in my book is that what we're seeing is the CHRO and the CIO are going to be best friends
Hmm.
because they now jointly preside over a blended digital and human workforce. Moderna was the first company to recognize that, and their CHRO and CIO are the same person. Yeah, so that's the way it goes, and it means everybody from the CEO on down needs to be engaged in this. I don't think that the CAIO will be a long-held title position,
Hmm.
the same way there was a chief digital officer
Right.
for a while, and then after 5 years they sort of vanish because that's just the way everybody does business now. The same will be true with the CAIO. 5 years from now, AI everywhere will just be the way every company does business, and if they don't, then they're not in business anymore anyway.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing your perspective. People can, check out your new book, The AI Ultimatum, and really appreciate you sharing your perspectives with our listeners today.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if I can help people, they can find me at stevebrown.ai, or they can email me direct, sb@stevebrown.ai. I help lots of companies figure out, how are they going to use AI to improve their impact and deliver more value to their customers and make their life better for their employees. I'd be delighted to help anybody that needs my assistance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve.
Hey, Jamie, nice talking with you.
You as well.